Imagine you're walking through a medieval town square, your tooth throbbing with such agony that you can barely think straight. You spot a red and white striped pole swinging in the wind, the universal sign of relief. You push open the door, and there he stands, the barber. But he's not holding scissors. He's gripping a pair of rusted pliers caked in dried blood, and beside him, on a wooden table, lies a saw, still wet from his last patient. This isn't a haircut. This is surgery. And you're about to find out why medieval barbers were the most terrifying men in town. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where the person who trimmed your beard could also amputate your leg, drain your blood, and if you were really unlucky, crack open your skull. For centuries, barbers weren't just grooming specialists. They were the surgeons, the dentists, the bloodletters, and the executioners of medieval medicine. And trust me, you did not want to end up in their chair. Let's get one thing straight. Medieval surgeons, the ones with actual medical training, they refused to do the dirty work. They saw themselves as scholars, philosophers of the body. They read ancient texts, debated humors, and prescribed treatments from a safe distance. But cutting into flesh, pulling teeth, sawing through bone, that was beneath them. So they handed those jobs to the barbers, men who already knew how to handle sharp blades and weren't squeamish about blood. After all, if you could shave a man's face without slicing his throat, surely you could handle a little amputation. Right? Wrong. So very wrong. Barber surgeons operated out of shops that doubled as butcher stalls. The same chair where you got your hair trimmed in the morning could be soaked in someone else's blood by afternoon. There was no such thing as sterilization. No one had even heard the word bacteria. Blades were wiped on dirty aprons, reused on patient after patient, and when they got too dull, they were sharpened on leather strops that had seen more blood than a battlefield. And those iconic barber poles? The red and white stripes weren't just decorative. They were advertisements. Red for blood, white for bandages. Some even had a brass bowl at the top, representing the basin used to catch blood during procedures. It was a warning as much as it was an invitation. Enter here, and you might not leave the same way you came in, or at all. So, what exactly did these barbers do? Let's start with the most common procedure, bloodletting. Medieval medicine was obsessed with the idea of balancing the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If you were sick, the thinking went, you had too much of one humor and needed it drained out. Fever? Bleed you. Headache? Bleed you. Broken leg. Believe it or not, bleed you. Barbers became experts in opening veins, and they did it with terrifying efficiency. The process was simple. The barber would tie a tight cloth around your arm to make the veins bulge, then take a small blade called a fleam and slice right into the vein. Blood would pour into a bowl, sometimes a pint, sometimes more. The idea was to let out the bad blood, but no one really knew when to stop. Patients often passed out. Some never woke up. And if the blade wasn't clean, which it almost never was, infection would set in within days. Your arm would swell, turn black, and if you were lucky, the barber would amputate before the rot spread to your heart. But bloodletting was just the beginning. Barbers also pulled teeth, and this was an absolute nightmare. There was no anesthesia, no numbing agents, nothing. You sat in a chair, maybe had a leather strap shoved in your mouth to bite down on, and the barber went to work with a pair of iron pliers. He'd grip the tooth, twist, pull, and yank with all his strength. Sometimes the tooth came out clean. More often, it shattered, leaving jagged fragments embedded in your gums. And if the barber slipped, which happened more than you'd think, he could crack your jaw or tear through the roof of your mouth. The pain was unimaginable. People screamed so loudly that barbers kept their shops near busy market squares, so the noise would blend in. And once the tooth was out, there was no stitching, no packing the wound. You were handed a rag soaked in vinegar or wine, told to press it against the bleeding hole, and sent on your way. Infection was almost guaranteed. Your gums would swell, pus would ooze, and if the infection spread to your bloodstream, you'd be dead within a week. But here's where it gets truly horrifying. Barbers also performed amputations. Imagine this. You're a soldier, a farmer, or just an unlucky soul who crushed your hand in an accident. Gangrene sets in. The flesh turns black, starts to rot, and the smell, oh God, the smell, is like death itself. A physician might diagnose you, but he won't touch you. That's the barber's job. So you're dragged to his shop, held down by several strong men, and the barber picks up his saw. No drugs, no sleep, just raw, searing agony. The barber works fast because speed is the only mercy he can offer. He slices through your skin with a knife, peels it back like the rind of a fruit, then takes the saw to your bone. The sound alone is enough to make grown men vomit. The grinding, the cracking, the wet tearing of muscle and tendon. You're screaming, thrashing, begging for it to stop. But the men holding you down don't let go. They've seen this before. They know if they release you, you'll bleed out before the barber finishes. Once the limb is off, it's tossed into a bucket, or worse, just thrown out the back door, into an alley where stray dogs fight over it. The barber cauterizes the stump with a red-hot iron, searing the flesh to stop the bleeding. The smell of burning meat fills the room. You pass out from the pain, and if you're lucky, you wake up a few hours later. If you're not, you die right there in the chair, and the barber moves on to his next appointment. And then there's trepanation, drilling holes into the skull. Yes, you read that right. If someone had severe headaches, seizures, or was acting strangely, medieval doctors believed there was pressure building up inside the head. Evil spirits, bad humors, or trapped demons. The solution? Bore a hole in the skull to let it out. And guess who got that job? The barber. He'd shave a section of your scalp, make an incision, peel back the skin, and then take a hand drill, basically a giant corkscrew, and start drilling into your skull. You were awake, fully conscious, feeling every twist, every crack, every splinter of bone. Some patients survived. Most didn't. And those who did were often left with infections, brain damage, or massive scarring that never healed. Barbers also treated hernias, lanced boils, set broken bones, and even performed crude surgeries to remove bladder stones, a procedure so agonizing that patients had to be tied to a table and gagged. The barber would make an incision near the groin, reach inside with unwashed hands, feel around for the stone, and pull it out. No gloves, no antibiotics. Just hope and prayer. Most patients died from infection within days. So, why did people keep going to barbers? Because they had no choice. Physicians were expensive, rare, and mostly useless. They'd prescribe you a potion made of crushed beetles and urine, charge you a fortune, and leave. Barbers were cheap, available, and willing to do what needed to be done, even if it killed you. And people were desperate. Pain, disease, and injury were constants of medieval life. If you had a rotting tooth, a gangrenous limb, or a skull-splitting headache, you'd crawl to that barber's chair and pray he had steady hands. The truly chilling part? Barbers had no formal training. There were no medical schools for them, no exams, no licenses. You learned by watching, by apprenticing under another barber who learned from someone else, who learned from someone else. It was a trade passed down through blood-soaked hands and trial and error, mostly error. And because there was no regulation, any man with a sharp blade and a strong stomach could hang up a striped pole and call himself a barber-surgeon. The mortality rate was staggering. For every patient who survived, 3 more died from infection, blood loss, or shock. Barber shops were death traps, and everyone knew it. But what other choice was there? Suffer in agony or take your chances with the blade? So now here's the real question. If you were living in medieval times, sick, injured, or in unbearable pain, would you walk into that barber's shop? Would you sit in that blood-stained chair, knowing full well you might never stand up again? Let us know in the comments below.